Hello and welcome to this webinar, which is Closing the Gap, a Global Perspective. We're really glad that you've joined us here today. We have a global audience joining us for this webinar. We have a global panel joining us for this webinar. So this is really a first, talking to people across multiple time zones. Delighted to have your company. A week or so ago, we launched this report. It's been presented at COP. Closing the Gap, a Global Perspective is a hugely important document. In a time when collaboration has never been so more important, this is a collaboration effort between 12 research and technology organizations across 8 countries. And it's really fantastic that we have some representatives of the people who authored the report, and also the contributors coming together for this webinar. So I'll be your host for this event. It'll last about an hour and a half. We have a fantastic lineup for you. First of all, I'm going to be dealing with questions when we get to questions. So if you see me looking down at a computer screen, please don't worry. I'm looking at your questions as they're coming in, and I will be posing them to the panel. And we'll introduce the panel shortly. But first of all, I would like to hand over to my colleague Luca Carradi, who's our Director of Innovation Networks here at the NZTC. And he'll be telling us all about the report. In fact, giving us the presentation that he has just recently presented at COP27, which is fantastic. So over to you, Luca.
Hello again. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you. So yeah, today we're going to talk about technology innovation and the role of technology innovation in the energy transition. And presenting this report and the key findings from this. This is a collaborative research, as Stephen just said. You can see all the organizations, the 12 technology and research organizations that contributed to it on the screen. And it is a collaborative effort that started a year ago at COP26, when we came together to start discussing in a summit and decide that we want to learn more, understand more. What are the various priorities? What are the various technologies that the regions, the 8 countries that are represented by these 12 international technology centers, the technology that these 8 countries are betting on and transitioning what are still oil and gas basin into net zero energy regions. And so this is what we're going to talk today, and this is the content of the report that we presented the last week at COP27. But before we get into the details, we prepare a short video to set a little bit of the context and some of the highlights.
The sun was the first source of energy. People rose and slept with the light, relied on wood and dung burning for heat, and water power to generate mills. From a handicraft economy to a manufacturing industry that uses machines and new technologies, the Industrial Revolution was born, powered by coal. Over centuries, the world has seen innovation, attempts at pushing the envelope, breaking new ground, and blazing a trail. But with this change came consequence: depletion of natural resources, increased air and water pollution, reduction in biodiversity, and greenhouse gas emissions causing global warming. To reach net zero, we can't stand still. We must move forward and embrace change. And the energy industry has an important role to play. Technology innovation will be crucial to tackle the problem. Current oil and gas producing basins can become net zero integrated energy regions by using next generation technologies to solve the problems of energy reliability, sustainability, and security. To evolve into a net zero system, we must accelerate the development and deployment of clean hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, renewable electricity, including onshore and offshore wind and solar, alternative fuels, and emissions reduction technologies. We must adopt digital transformations using remotely controlled operations empowered by data, automation, and robotics. These technologies are already emerging and being deployed, but we must increase the pace. We must fast-track technology innovation and deployment to accelerate the energy transition. At the Net Zero Technology Centre, we take the spark of an idea and turn ambition into reality. Working with the boldest developers and pioneering startups. We are also collaborating with a network of international technology centres across 8 countries to pool capabilities and resources across oil and gas producing regions, to identify the key technologies and actions required to accelerate the energy transition. We are urging other technology centres to join this collaboration, to take on the challenge. Let's break down barriers together and use disruption to propel us to a more sustainable future.
So this is about the technology innovation, it's about transition, and it is about collaboration. And you can see here on the slide some numbers. So again, we have 12 technology centers coming together, and it's complex to coordinate and to work together with 12 technology centers across the time zones and across the different regions. But it's important because we think that these regions actually represent an incredible basin, an incredible capital of technology knowledge, supply chain experience, innovation ecosystems that brought together can really do for the acceleration of the transition. And we can maybe move to the next slide and start looking at what are the key findings from this collaboration, this report. And you can see that key technologies that every region is focusing on are renewables, not surprising, hydrogen, and I'll come back to the other one, carbon capture, emission reduction, and digital. But let's talk about renewable. This is by no means a global number. These are the numbers for those 8 countries. But you can see the steep increase that is expected for each of them, for offshore wind, onshore wind, and from solar. And this is really should act as a call to action for the supply chain, for the innovation ecosystem, for the technology developers, because that technology, these technologies do exist today, but they are still somehow in the early stages of maturity. And there's so much that can be innovated to make them cheaper, to make them better, to make them more reliable and more impactful. And so the time for innovation really is now, because you can see the demand for this technology that will come, and for the sooner we get to a better state, the better. I'm not saying by any means that we shouldn't deploy. We should deploy at pace, in earnest, all this technology right now to start the energy transition. But we should align that deployment with the development of innovation to make them better. In a way, we're like driving the Ford T or the Volkswagen Beetle when we need the Tesla or the self-driving, self-parking and ultra-safe and reliable and efficient cars of today. So that same progress is reasonable to expect, to be expected for this technology. The second one that we're going to talk about is hydrogen. And you can see on the right, somehow some different in approach by the technology centers or by the region, actually, by the countries. Because some countries like UK and the Netherlands are focusing on volume. How can we kickstart the hydrogen economy by targeting 10 gigawatt of production in the UK of low carbon hydrogen, so that's green and blue, and or 3 to 4 gigawatt in the Netherlands of electrolyzed hydrogen, so green hydrogen. Other regions are actually setting targets to the cost of hydrogen. You can see Australia, Brazil, Canada, and USA, they are targeting between $1 and $2 per kilo. And both are actually important targets, because what we need to kickstart the hydrogen economy and use hydrogen to integrate and compensate the renewables on the left is actually cheap hydrogen at scale. So it is important that we find the new technology to develop, to produce them at a low cost, but at a low cost in big volume. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to move on to the other findings or the other results of the report. Carbon capture and storage, carbon capture utilization and storage is an important technology for most of the basin, not all of them, but for most of the basin. And that shouldn't be surprising in a way, because clearly where there is oil and gas, there is likely to be storage location for geological storage of carbon capture, or the carbon that is being captured. And carbon capture is also an enabler of a industrial decarbonization. How can we keep producing the materials that the modern society needs? But when the industrial industry cannot be electrified, hydrogen can be a replacement, and carbon capture is also another technology to get industry to zero. And that is the link between industrial production and the oil and gas industry. And the oil and gas industry in these regions is also a wealth of knowledge about the subsurface, about the behavior of the CO2 once injected, and the knowledge about the reservoirs or the aquifer where this can be injected, which come from the heritage of the oil and gas industry. So that there's a really important synergy there and an important enabler for accelerating carbon capture and storage. And then on the top right of the slide, you can see hydrocarbon emission reduction, because we need to be cognizant of the fact that we still have oil and gas producing, we still have oil and gas production, and we will still have oil and gas production for some time. Clearly, this is going to go down, and clearly the transition needs to happen from fossil fuel to renewable sources as soon as possible. But as long as we are producing oil and gas, that oil and gas needs to be produced in the cleanest way possible. That means eliminating emission from power generation, offshore or onshore, eliminating venting of methane, which is also very impactful as a greenhouse gas, eliminating flaring, and also introducing energy efficiency, and make sure that we don't have leaks, especially methane leaks. So it's monitoring, controlling, and preventing methane leaks. And finally, all these four technology, renewables, hydrogen, carbon capture, and emission reduction, are underpinned and empowered, if you want, by digital. The digital transformation, which is happening in all sectors around the world, and it's been happening for quite some time, is really making strides in the energy industry in the recent years. And that means use of data, to enable machine learning, artificial intelligence, smart sensors for remote operations and autonomous operations, and also advanced process control, again, making things more efficient. This is about digital twins, for example. So these are the key technologies. And as I said, all these technologies somehow exist today, and we can start deploying them. We are deploying them actually at pace, and we should accelerate that. But at the same time, and this is the goal of the technology centers taking part of the study, for us is about innovation. How can we make them better? How can we make them more performant, more reliable, and cheaper? If we go to the next slide, these are the 5 recommendations, because this is a short study that I encourage all of you to download, and it provides interesting reading on the different approach by the various countries and the similarity and the similarity and the common area. But we think that we can try maybe to drive 5 actions, 5 practical actions where all these centers and others, as the first video said, we are encouraging other centers from other regions. Again, this is not exhaustive; it's just representative of a good portion of the energy production. But other regions can also join. And the 5 actions that we are proposing that we're going to work on are about low carbon hydrogen. How can we have more and bigger testing and demo facility where we can test a new technology for hydrogen production alongside the production at scale? So not in a university lab, but real life scale testing of new technologies. It's about carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and new materials. How can we make that better, more efficient? It's about offshore wind specifically. We talk about all renewables are important, but most of these regions are facing seas, and big experience from the oil and gas industry in floating substructures. Can we identify innovative and standardized substructures that can accelerate the deployment of floating offshore wind and reduce the cost? And then grid connection also important. When in a moment where, in a period when energy security has become more and more important, differentiate and diversify the sources of energy and increasing the connection across countries and across basins is important. But can we align that infrastructure, make sure that it is compatible, make sure that we can transfer electricity both ways? And this is something that we're looking at, for example, with TNO, across the UK and the Netherlands, but it's something that can be thought in many other basins in the world, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Mediterranean and beyond. And finally, about data, what can we do about data? Can we find certified, verified data sets that we can bring together and apply machine learning and artificial intelligence or data analytics to accelerate understanding and to share better knowledge and experience. And one thing that regions that are still working on oil and gas should focus on as a first, I would say, and we recommend, is about venting and flaring. Can we share data about venting and flaring to enable faster deployment of technology? Because this is an urgent thing that we can do right now. So these are the 5 recommendations from the study that I think we're going to talk about in the panel. But if I go to the final slide before we move on, is just to recap where we came from and where we're going with this study. So as I said, we started at COP26 in Glasgow last year. We came together, we discussed for a couple of days, and we decided that we need to have more data, more information. We worked together for a year and in a collaborative way across these 12 technology centers to produce this report that we presented last week at Sharm el-Sheikh at the COP27. And now we're targeting COP28 and targeting turning these 5 recommendations into projects that can be funded, that can be actioned, and that we can be presenting at COP28. You can see 2 QR codes there. One is to download the report, but the other one is to provide your input to us. So do you agree with this recommendation? Anything else that we should consider? There's a short questionnaire if you access that QR code on the top right, which we will really welcome as an input. This QR code, this questionnaire is open for a month, so you don't have to do it right now. Just enjoy the rest of the conversation, but please go and give us your input and feedback, and we will consider that. And with that, Stephen, I'm handing over back to you for the rest of the session.
Thanks, Luca. That was really informative, a good overview of the report and the process that you went through to produce it. So now at this stage of the webinar, we're going to have our panel members join us, and I would like to introduce I guess from time zone onwards. The first one that I'd like to introduce is David Harris, Dr. David Harris, Chief Science Research Consultant at Cicero Energy in Queensland, Australia. David, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's about 7 o'clock or so your time, I believe. So thanks for in the evening. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. Then we're going to have Professor Julio Menegini from Brazil. Welcome to the webinar, Professor. You've got so many credentials behind your name. You're working for the Research Center for Greenhouse Gas Innovation. Really looking forward to hear your perspective on things. And second to last, we have Rennie Peters from TNO in the Netherlands. So Rennie's the business director for gas technology. So Rennie, you're busy. You've just jumped off another webinar to join us. So thank you for taking the time to be on the panel today. And last but not least, we have Luca Corradi from the NZTC, who has just gone through the presentation. So the whole point about today is to really get your perspectives. And we're going to pose a few questions to the panel, have a conversation, and then after that, hopefully we'll have some questions from the audience coming in that we'll be able to discuss as well. So I'd like to start off by asking just a very general question, first of all, to get everybody warmed up, so to speak. I'd like to ask the panel, what have you and your centres taken from this whole collaboration effort and this report? So what are the key outcomes for you that you see you can build on? And I think I'll come to David, first of all, to tackle that. David, what's your perspective on that?
Well, thank you, Stephen. Look, I think our perspective on that, coming from Australia, is an appreciation, I think, of the different perspectives of the different countries around the world and where they sit in the energy, both the technology chain and in the value chain and in the supply chain, and understanding how we can work together to shore up, if you like, the linkages, the connections across industry sectors that supports all of our roles in facilitating this transition. Now, Australia has a strong focus on export, but obviously needs to develop its own transition for our domestic industry. So working with others, help, I guess, with the supply side, also getting scale, and just understanding how we can create those synergies, and we don't all have to duplicate the types of things that need to be done, but we do need to connect, and we do need to do this in meaningful industrial and applied pathways. I think that became really clear as we worked together putting together the report.
And before conducting this exercise, had you all been talking to one another previously? I mean, is this something that has fostered the introduction to each other and understanding of each other's bases? I think I'll come to Rennie on that one, because you've got quite a global perspective.
Yeah,
so what do you think?
Good question. I think as research and technology organizations, we are used to working together internationally. As an example, we are working with CSIRO on CCS technologies for a long time, and we're working with NREL on hydrogen in the US. But now this brings together all these regions and these institutes. And what I found striking is that we're all looking at, okay, well, can we valorize the existing infrastructure that will the oil and gas sector leave behind? The depleted gas fields for CCS, the pipelines, platforms, maybe for hydrogen production, CO2 storage, energy storage. And all these regions are looking at what's the best transition path and which technologies fit to our backgrounds and our experience that we have. And I think it's quite good to get all these insights from the different regions and different institutes together, share experiences on where the technologies are, where the deployment is, where our challenges are. And we all know we have little time left, so we should speed up and accelerate the transition. And then collaboration is one way of realizing that. So really looking forward indeed to further collaborate on this.
Thank you, Rennie. Julio, coming to you from Brazil. I mean, obviously Brazil's a well-established oil and gas province. You invest a terrific amount into research and development already. What key learning have you taken from this whole experience working with the other research and technology organizations?
Well, thank you, Stephen. Well, I think for Brazil, it's very important to have such collaborations. We also have collaborations with 2 other NSF engineering research centers in the US. But this collaboration in particular is interesting because, well, it includes people from the US, from Europe, from other parts of the world, Australia. And in the Brazilian case, it's interesting because we can see the similarities. Brazil has a lot of similarities with the US and also with the EU, and the difference, and they are complementary in some sense. What we have in terms of similarity of the current situation of oil and gas production is somehow related or equivalent to the US. And and also in bioenergy, Brazil and the US are the leaders in ethanol production, talking about on-land green energy from biomass. But in other areas like wind energy, offshore wind energy, we have something that's very similar to the situation in EU and UK. And that's interesting, and also the capability of doing CCS and then to have hydrogen with a lower CO2 footprint. This is something that for us it's extremely interesting and gives us this perspective of complementary solutions being presented all together and then to intersect those that are similar to ours.
Thank you, Julio. Luca, you're just back from COP27 where you presented the report and the findings from the report. And I think from this COP, listening into what was happening over there, the need for collaboration and for pace to make change, never greater than now.
Absolutely.
So given what we've gone through with this study and the experience, what do you take away from it in terms of that whole, let's go faster, let's collaborate more? What's your perspective on that?
I think it's been touched by the other panelists, of course, but is the element of well, there's a sense of urgency because clearly climate change is here already, and the effects are starting to show, and we've seen that presented at COP very vividly by some of the delegation. Pakistan delegation was somehow also impressive coming up from what recently happened there, and like alerting the world that, as I say, understand, what happens in Pakistan doesn't stay in Pakistan, which is a strong message. So there's a sense of urgency there. I think there's an element of optionality and complementarity. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all. We live in a world which is very polarized. The debate tends to be this versus that. This is the technology that we should go, not that one. I think there's a mix of technologies, and we presented them in the report, some of them, and there are others. Some other parts of the world are more focused on the geothermal, some other are more focused on wave, if you want. But some of these technologies are actually nicely part of an integrated mix that goes beyond even one single sector. If you think about carbon capture joining up industry and oil and gas, and then hydrogen being complementary to both industry and the renewables as well. So that differentiation, so the differences that Giulio mentioned are important, and it's important that we appreciate the differences and we are informed about the differences, so we can work on the commonality and working together to maybe put together resources, put together efforts and accelerate common platforms that they maybe are deployed or evolved in a different way based on the regional or the context specificity. But to me, this is, I think, the summary of this exercise is there are common areas we can work together. There are differences we are aware of, and as long as we're aware of, we can collaborate on those as well, or we can just work independently. But just sharing that knowledge is a very first powerful point.
Excellent. I don't know if anyone from the panel would like to comment on what's just come out of COP27 and how this research collaboration really moves the agenda on. Anyone like to say a few words about that? David, have you got any views on that?
Oh, look, only that we see from what COP26 to COP27, we see, I think, starting to get really a handle on practical things that we can do now, remembering this is a transition rather than a step change, and it's about practical implementation, not just for the electricity sector, where much of the focus has been in CCS research and others, but how do we bring different industries to the same table? How do we leverage the knowledge and the capability and the scale? And is really, really obvious when we talk internationally. So how do we bring those scales to the same table and start to cross-fertilise across sectors? Because it's all about getting renewable or low-carbon feedstocks or front end into many of the industries which we still need, which are well established and very efficient, but we have a common challenge in changing the front end without losing the efficiencies, capabilities, and economics, if you like, of some very efficient industries. So I think that becomes clearer each year as we come to sectors that they transition, but it's haven't seen before. All these industry sectors and their technologies need to come together, and very much sector coupling, coordinating far more so than the energy sector's been before.
Interesting. And what strikes me from what you're saying, and also from Luca's presentation, is that I guess each region has its own priorities. We have very many similarities, but we have our own priorities as well. And one of the drivers behind this transition, when you listen to some of the conversations at both government level and society level and technology level, is how can we develop green or clean technologies which would then give us some form of advantage from a business perspective, from an export perspective, which is fine, but really the imperative is the climate change crisis that we have, and accelerating our pace of change in our energy system. So I'd like to come to Rennie at TNO, because TNO is doing so much work in the basin here in the North Sea, and of course everyone wants to maximize their kind of competitive advantage. But how do you see this accelerating? This whole effort has basically brought you all together. Is this now a catalyst to really grow this group and bring more into this effort? and have less of a business orientation and much more of a let's increase the pace of change so that we can tackle climate change. What's your perspective on that, René?
Yeah, thanks. What I think is very important with these groups and these regions, that we show that the regions which are traditionally known as oil and gas producing regions can also be the regions who are the showcases for the transition. And obviously the Netherlands, but also working together intensively with yourself, with the UK, but also with the neighboring countries, Germany, Denmark, Belgium, they are very much looking at, could the North Sea area be an example, a showcase for this transition, moving from oil and gas towards obviously offshore wind as the key driver for renewable energy, but also electrification of existing platforms for the remaining oil and gas production, green hydrogen production from offshore wind, floating solar, maybe floating wind in some areas as well, but also future required solutions for large-scale offshore energy storage. And if we can show not only with the renewable investment companies, the new businesses, but also the existing operators at the North Sea, the oil and gas companies who all have their ambitions to find their position in the new energies and have a huge, well, not only assets, but also experience and knowledge and capabilities to work in an offshore environment. Jointly, we can accelerate this transition. And I think that is also a positive thing of the development that we now see in the complete North Sea region, that this is a strong collaboration between the old industries, the traditional oil and gas companies, and the new industries, the new energy companies who are focusing on deployment of wind. But hydrogen brings them together. But also CCS is becoming very important as a decarbonization option for the North Sea region, for UK, Netherlands, and Norway. And I think we should make this region a showcase for this transition for offshore energy. And similarly, the other regions, I think Julio already mentioned the bio-based solutions, which are very dominant in Brazil and the US, could be a showcase for those regions. And every region can show that we can jointly accelerate this transition. I was a little bit disappointed at COP to hear that there was a lot of comments and concerns about oil and gas being dominantly present at this COP. And I think we cannot make this transition without having them involved. They have the capital, they have the experience, they have the knowledge, they know how the energy system works. And I think they feel the drive also to make this transition. So it's a transition we should make together. We're working together as technology institutes, but also the industries should work together and not exclude the technology, not exclude a player, or not exclude a region. This is something we should do together, and we should accelerate. And I think we are setting an example in our North Sea region on this together.
Super, thanks, René. Julio, you attended COP, I believe, as well. So, given what you heard at COP last week, and the question on the table right now is how do we really accelerate collaboration and development of these technologies, but have less of a kind of let's get competitive advantage from a technology perspective and more of let's share knowledge so we can increase the pace of change. What would your commentary be on those kind of topics?
Yeah. Oh, Julio.
Yeah. Well, what I believe that in Brazil, I will start with the Brazilian case. We have a major political change now that, for good, I believe that we are now, how can I say, we are again willing to become a leader in terms of climate change initiatives in the world, and then that's good. And then and just complementing what Peter just said, that's important. And I noticed in COP27 that for Brazil, we have a lot of options to decarbonize our energy mix. That's the the part that Brazil, I think it's very fortunate because we have a huge potential in terms of wind, offshore wind energy in the northeast of Brazil, and in the south and in the southwest we have huge potential for offshore wind energy, and with solar as well. And then if you take those possibilities and just following the line that Peter has just mentioned before, Brazil has the infrastructure already installed in the offshore oil fields, and to start producing blue hydrogen, offshore blue hydrogen, and then could be employed, for instance, as a carrier ammonia, the production of ammonia offshore, and with the hydrogen produced doing CCS. I think that we are one of the countries that has the possibility of doing CCS, not only on depleted oil reservoirs, but also on salt caverns, offshore salt caverns that we have a huge potential. And then what I saw in Brazil, that we have the technical and possibilities. And now with the new government, I think that we are going to have the proper political conditions in Brazil to go ahead with those projects and trying to decarbonize in the energy mix of Brazil.
Super, and I'd like to come back to Luca because obviously this question is pertinent to us here in the UK as well. How do we accelerate the collaboration? Because this is a great effort, bringing together 12 organizations, but really to make a difference, we need more involved. We need funding for work to get done. So how do we go about doing that? I know we're going to be presenting again at COP28. So by then, what would you expect us to present?
So that's the plan, you know, and the plan is to take some of this recommendation or this key outcome from the report and work together with other centers and turning them into fundable projects. You know, so what exactly are we going to do about this project, about this initiative, and what is the outcome that we expect, and then make a proposal that we bring it to COP for funding, both by state actors, but also non-state actors. And I think one of the highlight of COP27 has been the increased relevance of the non-state actors, businesses, organizations, that are realizing how at risk their global supply chain or the value chain is for effect of climate change. So they're starting investing in adaptation, but also in accelerating mitigation technologies. And so that's the goal, and also involving new regions. Our report doesn't include the Middle East, and it does because we got the British University of Cairo taking part of it, but it doesn't include the Gulf area. That is going to host COP28 in Dubai next year. And it's a big oil and gas producer, which is also doing a lot in renewables and in the country and around the world. So that's really the goal. Can we put together some practical proposal for projects to accelerate the development of these technologies? And one element I want to make, one comment I want to make, you talk about business, business light, business is important, and clearly business invest sometimes to achieve a competitive advantage, and nothing totally wrong with that, but we are seeing, I think, in the modern times, a different level, a different type of balance and equilibrium between public investment to accelerate some pre-competitive situation, pre-competitive technology, and then business is also coming together to develop pre-competitive technology. We see that in aerospace, where airplane manufacturers are working together on new materials or new structures, and then they work totally separate on some, proprietary, more advanced technology. But there's an element of pre-competitive that we really should focus on, and I think push the pre-competitive as far as we can in the technology readiness level, so that we can really get closer to deployment, and then it becomes more of a matter of what every country or every company puts on top of it. So this is a kind of ambition, I think, that we have for next year to bring to COP28.
Super interesting. You mentioned the aerospace example, which is a great example to raise. And the way that they collaborate is really based on data platforms as well. So they use digital tools to help that and enable that collaboration. And that's one of the, I guess, the challenges that you've posed as a result of this report. So I'd like to come to that. You've raised it, so let's talk about it. So one of the major challenges that we have in the report is Challenge 5, the establishment of an international collaborative working group to drive implementation of shared data trusts for technology development and purposes. So what does that mean, shared data trusts, and how do you think this can evolve into something really meaningful and impactful?
In simple terms, a data trust is a place where you can store and share a big amount of data, but at the same time maintaining the confidentiality about them. You know, if you think about analyzing a set of data, clearly you get more insight by analyzing a big set of data, and then you can use that insight on a local situation. So if you look at 200 platforms in the North Sea, that's a small set of data when you talk about in big data perspective compared to the number of users that social media platforms are, for example. It's still relevant though, and that's a good starting point, you know, and that's a part of the initiative that has been happening in the UKCS and sharing data. And you don't need to know exactly the ownership or the, you know, the implication of the specific data or of that compressor or that unit or that methane leak. It's not about blaming or about funding, you know, it's not about disclosing confidential information. It's about being able to launch machine learning or artificial intelligence agents, you know, algorithm, and apply them to a big set of data that are validated and therefore meaningful, to then develop a new solution or new technologies. And the bigger that data set is, the better. So one of the actions we're talking about is, okay, we have data from the North Sea, you know, there are data in Australia, there are data in Brazil, what really, can we find a way, which is difficult because of all the implications and concerns about confidentiality, about, you know, IP and etc. But can we find a way to establish a data trust, at least starting maybe from flaring and venting, so that we can accelerate then understanding of the problem and solutions to address it.
And from the rest of the panel, is that something that you see as an imperative, as a real key part of the drive forward to accelerate collaboration? I'll come to David on that one. Just on the data trust issue, where do you see this?
Look, I think all of those optimization type things, given these are very complicated value chains, that's really important. But I think there's also you know, that there's also got to be a trusted need here to be able to understand the true greenness, if you like, of these various value chains we're putting together. They're very complicated. There's obviously a commercial driver to ensure that the solutions are in fact genuine and real. And the only way we're going to be able to do that globally is through a framework and through a you know, strong understanding with all the data across what's a very, very complicated intertwined set of networks on the progeny of the green hydrogen or the process and value chain. So, you know, part of it is about optimizing the process, and part of it is also ensuring that we're actually achieving the outcomes that we set out to achieve. So I think the data perspective, the integrity of that is fundamental in making sure that we're effective in using the technologies and connecting the commercial aspects and the technical aspects to produce value chains and supply chains that are in fact achieving what we set out to do. And that's very much integrity of data, understanding of data across industries. This is not just a linear process. So very, very complicated, and I think absolutely important that we collaborate across those industries and countries to get a system that we can all trust.
Here in the North Sea, with TNO, Net Zero Technologies Centre has already taken a step towards sharing data and information with the One North Sea project that was recently carried out, which was looking at how do we how do we bring together, a more complete North Sea perspective on what projects are happening across the basin. So is that something you think we can build on and maybe change to reflect some of the complexity that David's talking about, Rennie?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure if the data trust aspects are critical here, but indeed collecting data which is available from different countries and different regions on the development of transition projects. In the North Sea, one North Sea project, we're collecting data on all the system integration options that are being deployed or studied in the North Sea region. So that's about hydrogen production, about CO2 storage, about electrification, energy storage. There's even a few projects on geothermal, I think, where we look at, okay, what is the status of these projects? Who are investing in these technologies? What are the sizes? What are the volumes? And derive from these collection of all the projects, what is the expected growth of these technologies in the North Sea region? So how much hydrogen can we expect in the 30s from green hydrogen production from offshore wind? How much CCS storage capacity could we expect if all these projects materialize? So collecting all this data and sharing the results, which we do in a public website, really helps to get a better overview of how the deployment of these technologies will evolve in the coming decades. I can give another example where in the Netherlands we're looking at applying data trust systems. That's to get a better understanding of the development of the hydrogen market, because the hydrogen market still has to develop, obviously, both the production, the storage, and the use side. And we are trying to make our best guess on what is the future expectation on the need for green hydrogen by the different markets and the different sectors. And that sometimes is confidential information for each individual player, but they're all interested in the total demands number. So we're trying to set up a data trust area where they can also apply their individual data. And then we aggregate it to a much higher level, and then we distribute and share it again, where there's a much higher quality information, let's say, on the true demand developments of the hydrogen market, and similar on the production side. So you get a better insight of the total hydrogen market development in the coming decades. So that's where we do indeed think about these data trust systems to be installed.
And just on the Netherlands, you're talking about hydrogen in the Netherlands, Rennie. So right now, I think in the report it says between 3 and 4 gigawatts of clean or green hydrogen production targeted in the Netherlands. So do you expect the Netherlands to become an exporter of green hydrogen, or a hub, an off-taker of green hydrogen for distribution throughout the rest of the European hydrogen backbone?
Yes, mostly a hub. I think green hydrogen is a very important means for decarbonization of industry clusters, but also think about steel industry, process industry, even parts of heavy-duty mobility in the future. We do expect a lot of the hydrogen to be produced from our offshore wind developments in the North Sea, but that will not be sufficient to supply sufficient hydrogen to the market that is needed. And the Netherlands want to also become an important import hub for Northwest Europe, dominantly Germany, maybe Belgium, northern France. So we will be a big importer in our main harbor clusters like Rotterdam, Amsterdam, maybe even Antwerp for Belgium, and then transport this hydrogen also to our neighboring major industrial clusters, for example, in the Ruhr area in Germany. So we expect about half of the hydrogen demand to be produced from offshore wind, and half of the demand being imported via hydrogen carriers like ammonia or LOHCs or liquefied hydrogen, and then serve as indeed a storage, import and transport hub to Northwest Europe.
Yeah. So here in Northwest Europe, I think it's fair to say we're seeing an increased interest in data hubs and data trusts and sharing data collaboratively. In Brazil, Julio, it's not a market that we know really well in terms of how the research and development is active. Is there a similar trend towards really sharing information throughout the supply chain? to drive decarbonization and to drive innovation activity?
Yeah, for sure. I believe that for Brazil, it's important to be part of these of such initiatives in order to share data and to do what we just discussed in the beginning, to make it possible for the different regions of the world to see where are the intersections among the different technologies and different applications. And as Peter just mentioned regarding hydrogen, Brazil is one of the biggest agriculture products producers of agriculture products in the world. We export a lot of agriculture stuff like soya beans and ethanol, of course, and corn as well. And then it's amazing, but Brazil has not, Brazil is importing fertilizers. And then to produce ammonia from green hydrogen in Brazil would be a way of starting to have the market for this green hydrogen through green ammonia that could be employed for fertilizer production. And to find the ways to do so, in Brazil, we have two big projects to produce green hydrogen in the northeast state of Brazil called Ceará, and another one in Rio de Janeiro, and with wind energy, with offshore wind energy, and also with solar energy to produce green hydrogen. And the first application of that green hydrogen would be to produce green ammonia. And then I think that to have the experience, for instance, that has already been mentioned, the hub, to develop hubs in Brazil, because Brazil is like a continent. We have 8,000 kilometers of shore, the Atlantic shore of Brazil. And then we have all the potential to have 3 or 4 hubs for the production of hydrogen, and then also in the future to become an exporter of hydrogen, and to share data and for other countries to know the numbers and how much gigawatts of hydrogen we are thinking, and what are the targets of those hubs that are already being designed and in the implementation and financial initial part of the development of the construction. We believe that to share this data is extremely important.
While we're talking about hydrogen, and before we move on to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience, I'd just like to go back to David, just to clarify Australia's position on hydrogen and what you intend to become a net hydrogen exporter, I believe. So I understand that Australia has signed a number of agreements with Japan in particular to provide hydrogen to Japan. But what's the ambition in Australia when it comes to hydrogen and export?
Yeah, okay. I think in the report we used an example for one of the case studies of the Japanese hydrogen energy supply chain project. Now, initially that project has been going for some years now, obviously relies on CCS. I mean, starting to try and develop the value chains there, in that case based on coal and fossil fuels, we need CCS to begin to build the scale and begin to build the infrastructure and begin to interface with the markets. So, you know, the objective, of course, is to build the support systems that will enable hydrogen. Hydrogen is just a mechanism here for energy storage, but to enable those industries to find their feet, to enable the infrastructure to be formed as we bring on stream more and more renewable sources of electricity, or bit of other pathways, as we've heard, from biomass, waste streams, many feedstocks to get to scale, and the scale is really challenging, and that's that's part of the issue Australia's facing, again, through looking at different hubs in different parts of the country where there is a different mix of feedstocks, for want of a better word, energy sources, either to produce hydrogen, ammonia, or other carriers. So the plan is to work with the markets, to work with Japan, as we traditionally have in fossil fuels, to maintain the supply chains and transition again the input to those so that we can manage at scale. You know, that includes liquid hydrogen exports to develop those technologies. It includes ammonia, green ammonia exports and substitution of ammonia directly in power plants in Japan and other places, and also includes ability to utilise ammonia for transport by reprocessing at the other end, if you like, back to clean hydrogen where appropriate. And of course, in Japan and other places, utilising the hydrogen in the form of the carrier, which makes sense to carry. So the plan is to build those value chains and supply chains, but do it with the end in mind, that we really need to be able to move to scale. And it's going to take quite some time to get the supply side for renewable energy to be stored in the form of hydrogen or others at that scale. So we need all of these pieces. You know, we picked up on CCS in this report, absolutely critical enabler to start to bring that scale forward, and the technologies from that transition to other heavy industries, be that steel making and other things, which again, Japan is a key customer for. So those key enablers, producing the renewable energy in the first place, is a big challenge. Getting it into a form that can be stored and transported with hydrogen or other, all have to be done at scale. And that's, as I said at the very beginning, finding our place in the supply chains where we can work together to enable the market pull, but also to make sure that the supply side can actually be a practical destination, because we have to get there, and we're not going to get there if any of those links are not there. That's really where that partnership began.
That's what you said, in the context of the value chain and the supply chain in Australia, absolutely mirrors what we're experiencing here in Europe as well. Same issues. Okay. Any comment on that?
Well, I think it's really important when we look at the pace of innovation, because as you said, all these things takes time, and time is actually the thing that we have less of. You know, and I think scale is important and innovation is important. And I think what we're trying to do here is bridging that gap between where innovation traditionally happens in small labs in the university and when the technology needs to be deployed. The industry, when we started 6 years ago, the industry has a history of taking on average 20 to 30 years to deploy a new technology. You know, and that's something we cannot afford. So, and that is changing, and that has changed, you know, for different models. So René mentioned the hubs, energy hubs in the UK and elsewhere. The industrial transformation is going through clusters, you know, bringing companies together with shared infrastructure and shared projects for CCS and hydrogen that can serve multiple players. So that's probably a good way. And I think it's a good way where if we can combine this cluster with testing facilities, which is one of the recommendations from the report, so that we can test the new technologies very close to the final deployment, maybe taking input, feedstock materials from that clusters without compromising the deployment of place, but at the same time, the field trial, and demonstrating the new technology. That is a way to accelerate the transition. And for that, the role of the supply chain is absolutely fundamental, because the supply chain are those who are making these clusters possible, and those also is what will make innovation adoption possible.
Sure. I'm going to move on now and come to some questions from the audience. So I'd like to start off with a really interesting question, and none of the panel have obviously seen the question. I'm going to read it out. It's from an anonymous contributor. And it just starts as follows. How do we make sure that we don't leave behind developing countries that might not have the means to invest in new technology or implement the energy transition? Fascinating question. I think it would be fair to say the 12 that have worked on this project are mostly developed nations, but some developing countries included. And there's a lot to talk about and unpack from this question. So who would like to start first? And I would say to the panel, don't wait for me to direct you on this. Jump in and have a conversation with each other. I'd really be keen to see that kind of interaction between all four of you. So who would like to tackle the question of how do we make sure we don't leave developing countries behind in this in the investment in this new technology or to implement energy transition?
I think it's very important because if you think, I've seen a recent a graph recently showing that actually in Africa, for example, the percentage of energy produced by renewables is very high compared to the rest of the world, which is a potentially misleading graph because we also need to remind that in Africa there are about 800 million people that are without any access to energy whatsoever. So bringing energy to them and bringing energy so that they can improve the standard of living and rightly get to what they aspire to, which is a more balanced world, needs to be done in the cleanest possible way, because the consequences of fueling that progress with the fossil fuel will be dramatic. So it is very important that the deployment of new and clean technology happens for the developing country, and especially those with the lowest rate. It's similar to the jump that some countries did when the developed world was relying on cable telephony and telecommunication, and some countries were able to go straight to cell phones and to mobile communication. So I think the collaboration, how do we make, the question is how do we make it? Collaboration is important, extremely important. And I think the COP27 made one progress. It didn't make much progress on the statements on fossil fuel, but it made progress on the creation of the loss and damage. And maybe that is a type of collaboration where funding can be directed to help a company not only deal with the consequences of, directing countries, not only to deal with the consequences of climate change, which are more impactful in some of the developing countries, but also to accelerate that transition to have a clean energy and safe energy.
Julio, I don't know if you would class Brazil as a developing nation still, but certainly a very rich economy. So from that perspective, your perspective in Brazil, how would you tackle this question?
Yeah, well, for sure, Brazil is a developing country, is a medium economy, but it's still a developing country with a lot of difference in different areas. But I agree with Luca, because now that solar energy, well, PVs, the cost dropped a lot in the past 10 years. I think that the same thing that happened with cell phones and comparing with cable that has already been mentioned by Luca, can happen in Africa and in countries like Brazil, because now you could provide energy for the population of the developing countries in a way that would start as a green source of energy, not only solar, but also wind energy. And then, but the matter is still how to finance those projects. And then it become more a financial problem, but it's easier now to make the population of poor countries in Africa, the population to have access of cheap energy and cheap and green energy. And this is the point nowadays that was not possible in the past. And then for Africa to become really, to provide the energy for their own population, and then to be able to export this energy, I think that this is the main point. And North Africa to have connections with Europe for the selling solar energy, that electricity through a grid that would cross the Mediterranean Sea would be something interesting. To develop in Africa projects like biofuel production but not biofuel to compete with food production. It would be something that should be done in a smart way using NBS, nature-based solutions, and also to make it possible to Africa to export the production of hydrogen if the technology to produce ammonia from green hydrogen, and then to start with that in Africa would be a way of including those developing countries from a particular region in the world.
Super. I saw Rennie, I think you wanted to jump in here as well.
Yeah, indeed. I would like to spend a little bit on this setting up of hydrogen transport and value chains towards Europe, as we will be one of the importing regions in the world for green hydrogen. And the developing countries, both in Africa, but also Southern America, which could be a big supplier of green hydrogen for the markets for Europe and others. But that cannot be done without development of the country itself. And I think green hydrogen production from renewables, whether it's solar or wind, will create also great opportunities for the countries themselves, not only to supply a cheap green electricity and energy, but also think about the desalinated water, drinking water that has to be supplied if you want to produce green hydrogen. So you need big desalination plants, which can also provide clean water for local irrigation and local communities. So I think you cannot set up a green hydrogen value chain with developing countries without developing the country itself with clean energy and clean water. And also even further in the value chain, if you're producing green hydrogen, you want to transport it as ammonia from these countries. Well, there's a small step from ammonia to fertilizer. So I know countries like Uruguay, Chile, South Africa, they're also looking at setting up local industries based on green hydrogen further into the product market for local supply. So I think setting up a green hydrogen value chains between developing countries and developed countries can also help to accelerate the transition and deployment of green technologies in the country itself. So this could be really beneficial for both.
Do you think this group then could expand to include more developing countries to kind of disseminate some of the key technology areas that we're focusing on? And that might help. Luca, what's your thought on that?
Yes, as I said at the beginning, right? So this is an open collaboration, not a closed group. So we really welcome and encourage other technology centers or innovators to join from developing countries. It's a matter of finding them, you know. But absolutely.
Okay, I have another question from the audience. These questions don't go in any specific kind of category order. I'm just going to take them as they come. This one's about communication of the development of green technologies. The common person has a limited understanding of such developments, which impacts the political motivation to invest in technologies. So are we doing a good, I guess the implication behind that statement is, are we doing a good enough job to explain where these technologies fit within, I guess, the value chain or the jigsaw puzzle that is energy transition and also achieving net zero within a society? So are we positioning ourselves properly in that respect? I think I'll come to David first on that one, because obviously Australia has a big opportunity with renewable energy technologies, but you also have a very big installed base of extraction industries down there as well. So what's your perspective on communicating the value of switching over to renewable energy technologies?
I think that the challenge here comes to infrastructure. I think very, very widely dispersed industries and communities for that matter, and our existing power grids are very skinny and don't cover a lot of the country, and the population is dispersed along the coast. So it's sort of important, I guess, when we talk about renewable energy, people immediately think of the end use. So they think about the electric vehicle, or they think about the solar on their house, and Australia has very high penetration of solar in the house. I guess where we aren't as clear is what does it really mean to get that renewable energy into all of the bigger and broader sectors. People take it for granted, I guess, that you'll be able to recharge your electric car or you'll be able to have a hydrogen infrastructure, but that's very challenging in a country with very large distances, reasonably dispersed population. So that's difficult. Buying an electric vehicle won't help unless you've got the infrastructure to supply renewable recharging or renewable hydrogen along the way. And understanding the scale, understanding the challenge of just providing enough renewable energy, let alone in the mechanisms by which we're going to need to distribute that and manage it, I think is something we can do better with. Although now with the development of many of these regional hubs, those things are really stimulating the associated industries that are needed to support that. And that goes right back to education, to engineering, to technical support that feed into any of these major industries. Now, we have strong support for existing steelmaking areas and other, but we need to be able to bring on these support industries that will work at the interface where we're bringing stored renewable energy, be it in the form of hydrogen or ammonia, into these systems. So I guess that's both a communications challenge, but an infrastructure and integration challenge. That's very complicated, and people often look at it as a single industry. And I think the big challenge is looking at how do the industries provide synergies so that we can create an ecosystem that will allow us to bring this cleaner energy into all the sectors. We mentioned agriculture, transport, steelmaking, all of these things link back through solar, biomass, waste, etc. So that is a challenge, both from a communications perspective, but and an understanding, I guess, of synergies. We tend to leap to the end use very quickly. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, David. But there's a question come in that builds on this as well, because if we are making the transition, the energy transition, skills become a completely, huge question, completely important here. So the questioner is written in saying, developing green technologies and reaching net zero will need at least 200,000 technical, non-higher education new jobs in the UK alone. So that's just in the UK. What are the panel's thoughts regarding possible national and international solutions for this skills and employment challenge? Because we can build the capacity, but we need people to work in these energy these sectors that with these technologies. And yes, skills is an issue here in the UK, and I'm sure it is as well in Europe. Rennie, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think it could be actually one of the biggest challenges in the transition, because I think in many cases the technologies are there, but the scale at which we have to deploy these technologies, whether it's solar cells on the roof or in factories, the offshore wind, the onshore wind, the amount of people we need to get them installed and operated is huge. We shouldn't forget there's also some skills and capacity and people that are released, so let's say from the oil and gas business, who have the right capability and skills to work in offshore environment for offshore wind deployment, for example, or for hydrogen development. In the Netherlands, we had a huge number of people working in the gas sector with our gas production, both onshore and offshore, who have an interest and I think also the skills and the expertise to work on hydrogen or CO2. So it's also about training people for the new business and the new type of activities that have to be done. But I think indeed on the installation business, and that's probably the biggest challenge, which will hinder the fast deployment of this in the Netherlands. If you want to, at the moment, if you want to install a solar panel on your roof or a heat pump in your system, it takes you at least half a year before we have the people available to do it. So it's really becoming the biggest hurdle. Also on the infrastructure, expansion for power grids. That is really limiting the transition at the moment in our region.
And in Brazil, Julio, are we seeing an investment in bringing people through and developing skills so that we can make this transition happen?
Well, not in the scale that we believe that's necessary, but I agree that we have to make people, well, to educate and form people to work on those new technologies. But it's interesting in Brazil because natural gas is not like Europe or even the US. We don't have yet a proper network to distribute natural gas. We are increasing the network. However, now we have to be prepared to have that network already set to be able to handle with hydrogen in the future. And like what Peter just mentioned, when you have people working with natural gas, it's easier to have them start working relatively in a short period of time with hydrogen or CO2. And if we talk about offshore technical staff in Brazil, what's interesting is that a lot of investment is coming to Brazil to increase the production of oil and gas. And then if we start adding not only the production of oil and gas, but also to do CCS on site to decarbonize the oil and gas production offshore, and then bring together wind energy to decrease even more the CO2 footprint of that oil and gas production. We are able to go forward and then to become a main exporter of blue hydrogen or green hydrogen when produced from solar and wind onshore or offshore. And then I believe that in Brazil, we always had a problem with with a lack of the number of engineers and technical stuff to work on that. But I really believe that as times goes by and those opportunities to Brazil start to appear to export hydrogen, more people will get involved and more people will be formed to work on those subjects.
Super. I'm just conscious of time. We have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to bring the panel's brain power back to some of the key findings in the report. So moving on from questions, really just a final statements on some of the key findings. So one of the findings and the challenges is the establishment of a joint open innovation competition to fund disruptive floating offshore wind substructure demonstrations. So that's a very interesting idea, collaborating in an open competition across different nationalities and geographies. I'd quite like someone to explain to me the thinking behind that, and also potentially what would be needed to make that work, so that we can get to the point where we can launch an open competition. Anyone like to take that one on?
I think I can give the start. The thing is, the size of offshore wind that is needed is big, and a lot of that wind is far from shore, where the sea is deep, which means they cannot rely on the classic pillar structure, which is put on the seabed. So floating structure becomes a requirement. Floating structure can be complicated because if you think about just the physics and the dynamic of wind, and especially sometimes unpredictable wind, we're talking about climate change as well. So resilient infrastructure that can sustain and actually operate with waves and wind is not a simple thing. Now, the oil and gas industry, which is present in all of the regions of this this collaboration have a deep experience in floating structure. Of course, they're not floating structure for wind turbines, they're floating structure for different things. So it's not easy just translate, transport. But the skills are there. We're talking about skills, the engineering is there, the understanding of all this is there. And so how can we accelerate developing something that is innovative, cheaper, better, and standard? And this is one of the conundrums sometimes of innovation, because standardization somehow stops innovation once you have a standard solution. So can we innovate fast to get to a standard, and then evolve it? Because standard is a way to reduce cost as well. When we had deployed thousands of wind turbines, thousands and thousands, the standardization means economy of scales. Economy of scales means mass production, means lower cost. But there's no point in standardizing something suboptimal from a technical perspective. So, can we put together innovation and standardization? And that's the goal of this initiative, I think.
Anyone else from the panel?
Well, to be honest, for the Netherlands, it's not really critical because we have an offshore sector which is shallow waters. Even to the highest point, 200 kilometers offshore, it's only 40, 50 meters depth, and we can develop offshore wind as fixed structures. Although we do have quite a strong industry on offshore technology and developing floating systems, even FPSO type of systems, and also floating structures indeed, which could serve for offshore wind. But I think the idea actually also applies for other developments that where indeed innovation and standardization should be developed both for cost reduction. For example, offshore hydrogen production, that's an area where we're looking into intensively now. We need to scale up, we need to standardize, and we need to reduce cost, and a similar approach probably could be applied there as well. So you challenge the industry to innovate, but you do this in a competitive way to get to standards quickly, and in that way reduce cost, but also with standardization accelerate scaling up and deployment. So the example is on floating wind, but I think the idea and the concept applies for multiple developments that are needed in several concepts.
And David,
I agree entirely with Peter's that we have to focus. Well, one main challenge is wind production in deep waters, that's for sure. But apart from that, the production of hydrogen offshore is something that is not yet properly set in terms of the cost. And then I think these are the main challenges if you really want to have the production of clean energy offshore and decarbonizing the oil and gas production offshore.
Super. And we're almost at the point where we're going to start to think about closing off the webinar. So what I would like to do is just end by asking the panel just to give us simple statements from each one of you as to how you think this collaboration will develop in the run-up to COP28, what the intention is again to do at COP28 with this collaboration. So I'll start off with Luca, then we'll come to David, then Renee, then Julio.
I said before this, right, that the goal for us is, this has been a great collaboration. I think it's been really enjoyable and productive, and we uncovered common challenges. We discussed different nuance of the priority for technology innovation, and we came up with some common areas where we all agree this needs to be improved and innovated upon. And so the goal for me would be, all right, let's now try to turn this into action, try to turn this into a collaborative project, try to find the funding for that project and the client in the sense of the industry adopters for the solution that we want to develop together. And for example, this competition, and bring them to COP28. COP28 is in an oil and gas producing region, although it is a diversified energy producing region at the moment. It has the oil and gas industry present. It will. We mentioned before the criticism of COP27, but I think including the industry is a good thing. Inclusion is a good thing for finding the solution. And so that's probably the best place where we can present projects that help oil and gas basins, as they are now, transition to be net zero technology, net zero energy regions, and find the push behind the technology innovation that we need to make that happen.
David, what's your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think through this process, these are largely sort of research organisations, I guess, and we're most of us involved in other networks as well. And I think where we can now understand the different perspectives a little better, I think this network and other networks, some of the ones that Japan are facilitating, like the RD20 and other things, have common challenges here, and there's a real opportunity, as I think Rene mentioned, to be able to leverage and share some of the facilities, some of the initiatives that each of the countries have already progressed, and others, some are well ahead of others, but the facilities are there, and are we able, to be able to start to share some of our pilot plants, some of our initiatives that have taken some countries and their technologies where they are, and this can help both developing countries and also other countries who are playing in different parts of the value chain. We all need domestic utilisation industries, even if we're exporting hydrogen and so forth. So I think it opens the door for better utilisation of our collective resources. We don't necessarily need lots of extra special funding to do that, because many of us are working in areas which have resources, but can we use those resources better? So facilities that we have in CSIRO, can groups from TNO come and work on that? And we've done that, quite effectively. But I think what these sort of initiatives have shown is that we can do it even more effectively when we bring a much clearer common goal. It's not just our project learning off another, we actually create a bigger project. And just through that type of closer sharing, if you like, of resources, we will be able, I think, to provide some of those demonstrations, some of those different approaches to the barriers that industry are facing. I think industry have got some great knowledge and large-scale things, but we need to look at some of those dot joining technologies that will help, the manufacturing industry link in with the energy sector, to help the transport industry and the agricultural industry, for example. I think as research groups with technologies that have been developed in one sector, we've got the ability to actually start to share that and bring it across those industry sectors. And I think this sort of network can help us make that happen.
Okay, we're almost out of time now, but I'd just like to give Rene and then Julio the last word. So Rene.
Yeah, let me keep it short. I think this project showed that, of course, all our individual institutes working in different regions have a great knowledge about what's happening in their region, what's the status of technology, what's the status of deployment of the technology in pilots or demos, what is the industry doing, what are the local policies, and collecting that already gives a great overview of where we are in this transition. But the next step, I think, is, and we're doing that already a little bit, of course, with Net Zero Technology Center and North Sea countries, is apart from your own national part of the basin, if you look at the North Sea as the total region, and you bring all these knowledge and expertise together from the different institutes, can we make a broader view and a broader vision on how, for example, infrastructure should be developed for hydrogen and CO2, where the CO2 storage areas could be, and what impact does it have for the complete Northwest European region. So collaborating more on regional basis and sharing these experience with other regions, I think is a really valuable approach here, where the value of the institutes can really become visible. Yeah.
Super. And Julio, you have the last word. What's your hope for this collaboration?
Such collaboration is extremely important, not only because we see through seeing what other groups are doing and see the similarities and the intersections and things that are complementary, but also to make it possible for our own governments to have and to develop the new policies for CO2 reduction and greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and then to give us, the government, the proper numbers, and also to be able to show where the technologies are ready to be applied, and where the investments should go, and also to apply and to convince our governments that there is a huge need for investment in research and innovation to give the breakthrough new technologies that we need for attacking and mitigating climate change. And then such collaboration is extremely important for all of that.
Okay, thank you so much, Julio. Rennie, David, Luca, it's been a great discussion. We've run slightly over time. I do apologize to everyone who might be on a tight time schedule, but it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks to everyone involved in the collaboration, and I wish you well with developing this for COP28. Thank you very much.